I've spent nearly 7 years working as a private investigator, and most people have the wrong idea about what that job actually looks like. No, I wasn't chasing criminals across rooftops or solving elaborate murder mysteries. Most days were painfully ordinary. I'd sit inside a parked car for hours, documenting where someone went, who they met, and when they came home. Sometimes I'd spend an entire week on a case only to discover that nothing suspicious had happened at all. But every now and then a case would stay with me, not because it was violent, not because it made the news, because it reminded me that obsession can quietly destroy a person's life before anyone even realizes it's happening. To protect her privacy, I'll call her Emily. When she first walked into my office, she looked confident, well-dressed, professional, the kind of person who had everything under control. But the moment she sat down across from me, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She kept glancing toward the window behind me as if she expected someone to be standing outside watching us. I asked if she was all right. She smiled for about half a second before the smile disappeared. "I don't think I'm being followed anymore," she whispered. "But I need to know if he's still out there." That sentence changed everything. Emily owned a fast-growing interior design company. She had started it in her tiny apartment, with nothing more than an old laptop and a few freelance clients. 5 years later, she had a real office, 12 employees, and projects across several cities. It looked like an overnight success. It wasn't. She worked nearly every day without taking breaks. She slept in her office more nights than she cared to admit. Every pound she earned went back into growing the business. Eventually, she needed investors. Friends introduced her to several people interested in helping new businesses. One of them was a man named Daniel. At first, Daniel seemed perfect. He was friendly, successful, always polite. He dressed like someone who had just stepped out of a business magazine. Luxury watches, tailored suits, expensive sports cars, and somehow he always seemed to know everyone. Emily met him through mutual friends at a charity event. Over the following months, they became close, not romantically, at least not officially. They had dinner together a few times. They talked about business for hours. Daniel constantly offered to invest. Emily refused every single time. She hated mixing friendship with money. But businesses don't survive on pride. About 8 months later, one of her largest clients unexpectedly canceled a contract worth thousands. Another investor backed out. Payroll was approaching. Emily had no options left. She called Daniel. He transferred the money that same afternoon. No contracts, no lawyers. Just trust, she said, accepting that money was the biggest mistake of her life. At first, nothing changed. Daniel never asked for updates, never pressured her, never even mentioned the investment. Emily actually believed she'd worried for nothing. Then the phone calls started. 1 call, then 5, then 20. If she didn't answer immediately, he'd leave voicemail after voicemail asking where she was. If she replied an hour later, he'd ask why she'd ignored him. At first she assumed he was lonely. She tried to be understanding, but the messages became stranger. He wanted to know who she had lunch with, why she'd stayed late at work, who drove her home, who the man was standing beside her in a photograph posted by one of her employees. He somehow noticed everything. She never remembered telling him her daily schedule, yet he always seemed to know exactly where she'd been. One evening, after meeting a client downtown, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The driver wore sunglasses despite the rain. She didn't think much about it until she saw the same SUV outside her apartment later that night. The following morning, it was parked outside her office. Again, she convinced herself it was coincidence. It had to be. Then Daniel called. Without saying hello, he asked, "So, how did your meeting go?" Emily froze. She had never told him about that meeting. She laughed nervously and asked how he knew. There was silence. Then he simply replied, "I noticed things." Over the next few weeks, Daniel's behavior became impossible to ignore. If Emily stopped for coffee on the way to work, he'd casually mention the cafe later that afternoon. If she worked late, he'd ask if she was planning on making a habit of sleeping in the office again. The strange part wasn't what he said. It was how specific he was. There were details that nobody else should have known. One Friday evening, Emily attended a networking event about 30 minutes from her office. She never posted about it online, and none of her employees knew she planned to go. Near the end of the event, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "Blue looks good on you." Emily looked around the crowded room. Nearly 100 people were there. She couldn't see him anywhere. Her heart began pounding. She quietly walked outside and scanned the parking lot. Nothing. No sign of Daniel. Only rows of parked cars. She convinced herself that maybe someone had told him where she was. It was the only explanation that made sense, or at least the only one she wanted to believe. The following Monday, Daniel showed up at her office without warning. He carried 2 expensive coffees and smiled as though nothing was wrong. Her receptionist assumed he was an important client and showed him straight into Emily's office. "I thought you could use a break," he said. Emily thanked him but explained that she was in the middle of a meeting. His smile disappeared for just a second. "I'll wait." She told him it might take an hour. "I don't mind." He sat in the reception area for nearly 2 hours. He never looked at his phone. He never spoke to anyone. He just watched the hallway leading to her office. When Emily finally walked him outside, she politely explained that surprise visits weren't appropriate. Daniel laughed. "I invested in your future. I just wanted to see how my investment was doing." Something about the way he said the word investment made her uncomfortable. It didn't sound like he was talking about the company anymore. It sounded like he was talking about her. After that day, the gifts started arriving. Flowers, jewelry, designer handbags. Every package had no return address, only a handwritten note. "You deserve better. You'll understand one day. I'm always here." Emily returned everything she could. The packages kept coming. She blocked Daniel's number. He began calling from different numbers. She blocked those too. Then the emails started, dozens every day. Sometimes they were polite. Sometimes they were angry. Sometimes they simply contained photographs of places she had visited that same day, a supermarket, a petrol station, the entrance to her office, even her apartment building. No people, just the places, as if someone wanted her to know they were always nearby. That's when she finally decided to hire me. When she finished telling me everything, I asked one question: "Have you gone to the police?" She looked down at the floor. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because technically he hasn't threatened me." She was right. Everything Daniel had done lived in a legal gray area, unwanted, disturbing, but difficult to prove as criminal. My job was simple: find evidence, figure out how close Daniel really was. The next morning, I parked across the street from Emily's office before sunrise. At first, nothing happened. Employees arrived. Clients came and went. Delivery vans stopped outside. It looked like any ordinary business day. Around noon, I noticed that a silver sedan parked half a block away. The driver never got out. He wasn't reading. He wasn't using his phone. He was simply watching the building. I photographed the license plate, ran it through a database later that afternoon. The vehicle had been rented using fake identification. That immediately caught my attention. Professional stalkers rarely use fake IDs. Obsessive people do. The next 3 days followed the same pattern. Different rental cars, different clothes, same man, Daniel. He never approached Emily. He simply watched, sometimes for 10 hours straight. On the 4th night, I decided to follow him instead. He drove across town without stopping once. Eventually, he pulled into the car park of an abandoned shopping center that had closed years earlier. He sat inside his vehicle with the engine running. I stayed far enough back that he wouldn't notice me. 20 minutes passed. 30. An hour. Then another car arrived. A white delivery van. A man stepped out and handed Daniel several cardboard boxes. No conversation, no paperwork, just boxes. Daniel loaded them into his boot and drove away. Something about the exchange didn't feel right. I couldn't explain why, but every instinct I had told me this case was about to become much worse. The next morning, I went back to the abandoned shopping center before sunrise. I wasn't expecting much. If Daniel was meeting someone there, chances were he'd never use the same location twice. Still, experience had taught me that people obsessed with routines rarely broke them completely. The car park was empty. The old shopping center had been abandoned for nearly a decade. Most of the windows were boarded up. Weeds pushed through the cracked asphalt, and faded signs still hung above empty storefronts. I decided to look around on foot. Near the loading dock behind the building, I noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Someone had been using the area recently. Following them led me to a rusted service entrance. The door was secured with a heavy chain, but beside it, there were fresh footprints. Someone had walked in and out several times during the past day. I photographed everything before leaving. When I returned to my office, Emily was waiting for me. She looked exhausted. "I think he was outside again." "What happened?" "I woke up around 3 this morning. I heard someone walking on the gravel outside my bedroom window. Did you look?" She slowly nodded. "I thought I saw someone standing near the fence." "Could you tell who it was?" "No, but I know it was him." Fear has a strange way of convincing us that we're certain about things we never actually saw. I didn't tell her that. Whether it had been Daniel or not didn't matter. She believed it was him, and that fear was real. That evening, I installed 2 discrete security cameras covering the front and back of her house. Emily insisted she would be fine on her own. I wasn't convinced. Just after 2 o'clock the following morning, my phone rang. "Emily," she was whispering. "He's here." I grabbed my keys and drove faster than I probably should have. By the time I arrived, every light inside her house was off. She was following my instructions. "Stay quiet. Stay away from the windows." As I parked down the street, I spotted a figure standing beside her letterbox. Tall, dark hoodie, hands in his pockets. He wasn't trying to break in. He wasn't knocking. He was just standing there, watching the house. I quietly stepped out of my car. The moment my foot touched the pavement, the figure turned. Even from that distance, I could feel him staring directly at me. Then he ran. I chased him through the neighborhood, across back gardens, between narrow alleyways, over fences. He moved surprisingly fast. Finally, he disappeared through a gap in an old chain-link fence behind an abandoned warehouse. When I climbed through after him, he was gone. There was nowhere he could have disappeared to. The warehouse stood alone, surrounded by empty land. I searched for almost 20 minutes. Nothing, not a sound, not a footprint, nothing. Then I noticed a faint light coming from inside the warehouse. One tiny yellow glow. It disappeared almost as quickly as I'd seen it. I approached slowly. The front entrance had been welded shut years ago, but around the side, one of the loading doors had been forced open just enough for someone to squeeze through. The smell hit me immediately. Mold, rotting wood, and something else. Something metallic. Old blood has a smell you never forget. I switched on my flashlight. Rows of abandoned shelves stretched into darkness. Broken machinery covered in dust stood like silent statues. Then my light landed on something that made me stop walking. Photographs. Hundreds of them, pinned across an entire wall. Every single photograph was of Emily. Some had clearly been taken years ago. Some had been taken only days earlier. Pictures of her shopping, walking her dog, having lunch with friends, standing outside her office, even sleeping through her bedroom window. My stomach dropped. This wasn't someone casually watching her. This was years of planning, years of obsession. In the middle of the wall hung one photograph larger than all the others. It wasn't a photograph of Emily. It was a photograph of me, taken earlier that evening while I had been sitting in my car outside her house. Someone had been watching me the entire time. I slowly turned around, suddenly aware that I might not be alone inside that warehouse. Every instinct I had told me not to move. The warehouse was completely silent. Too silent. I switched off my flashlight. The darkness swallowed everything around me. For nearly a minute, I stood there without making a sound, listening. Then a floorboard creaked somewhere behind me. It wasn't loud, just enough to tell me I wasn't alone. I slowly reached for the small tactical flashlight clipped to my belt and held it like a weapon. "Daniel?" I called. No answer, only another creak. this time closer. I spun around and flashed the light toward the noise. Nothing, just rows of rusted shelves. My heartbeat was so loud that I could barely hear anything else. I backed toward the exit, refusing to turn my back on the darkness. Halfway there, I noticed something lying on the floor. It was a leather notebook, fresh. No dust. Someone had dropped it recently. I picked it up. Inside were pages filled with neat handwriting. Every page was dated. At first, I thought it was a journal. Then I realized what it actually was. It was a record of Emily's life. Monday, 7:45 a.m. Left home wearing a gray coat. 12:18 p.m. Lunch with female client at Riverside Cafe. 6:42 p.m. Stopped to buy flowers. The entries continued for years. Every movement, every routine, every person she spoke to. Near the back of the notebook, the writing became increasingly disturbing. She'll understand soon. She keeps choosing the wrong people. I have to protect her from them. She belongs with me. Then I reached the final page. There was only one sentence. Tomorrow night, I finally bring her home. A chill ran through my body. Tomorrow night? He wasn't just watching anymore. He had a plan. I snapped photographs of every page and immediately called the police. Within 15 minutes, several patrol cars surrounded the warehouse. Officers searched every room, every hallway, every storage area. Daniel was gone. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. The police collected the notebook, the photographs, and several other items left inside. One detective pulled me aside. "This is enough for a warrant," he said. "But we need to find him before tomorrow." Emily didn't return home that night. The police arranged for her to stay in a secure location while officers watched her house. The following day felt endless. Every hour that passed increased the tension. By evening, there was still no sign of Daniel. At 10:17 p.m., my phone rang. It was one of the detectives. "We've got movement." A neighbor's security camera had captured Daniel entering the woods behind Emily's neighborhood less than 20 minutes earlier. Police units rushed to the area. I joined them. Searchlights swept through the trees as officers spread out in a long line. The forest was eerily quiet. Then someone shouted, "Over here!" We ran toward the voice. Hidden beneath thick branches was a small campsite. There was a sleeping bag, empty food tins, water bottles, and dozens of photographs of Emily. He had been living there for weeks, maybe months. One officer pointed his flashlight deeper into the trees. A man was running. "Police! Stop!" Daniel sprinted through the woods, crashing through bushes without looking back. The chase lasted only a few minutes before he reached a steep embankment. He slipped, lost his footing, and tumbled several meters down into a shallow creek. By the time officers reached him, he was exhausted. He didn't fight. He didn't run again. He simply looked up and smiled. "I was only trying to protect her," he quietly said. Those were the only words he spoke that night. The investigation uncovered more than any of us expected. Daniel had never been the successful investor he claimed to be. Most of his expensive cars had been rented. His luxury lifestyle had been financed with loans and money borrowed under false identities. He repeated the same pattern in different cities. He would meet ambitious women, earn their trust, offer financial help, and slowly try to make himself the center of their lives. Most recognized the warning signs early and cut contact. Emily hadn't. Not because she was careless, because she believed she was accepting help from a friend. Daniel eventually pleaded guilty to multiple stalking-related offenses and several fraud charges. Emily repaid every penny of the investment, not because she had to, but because she wanted every possible connection to him erased forever. I still think about that case. People often imagine that the most dangerous person is the one who threatens you openly. In my experience, that's rarely true. The most dangerous people are often patient. They smile, they earn your trust, they convince you they're helping. And by the time you realize something is wrong, they've already built a place for themselves in your life. Sometimes the scariest monsters don't break down your door. They wait for you to invite them in.